John's hands were covered in grease as he worked on the old Toyota Corolla. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smudge of dirt behind. It was just another day at the mechanic shop in Lagos. As he tightened the last bolt, his phone rang. It was his friend David. "John, I've got a deal for you," David said excitedly. "I know a guy who's selling a brand new iPhone. He's asking for a ridiculous price, but I think you should check it out." John's eyes lit up. He had been struggling to make ends meet, and a new phone would be a luxury he couldn't afford. "How much is he asking for?" John asked, his curiosity piqued. 20,000 naira, David replied. "I know it's a steal. The phone is still in its box and it's the latest model." John's heart skipped a beat. He had seen the same phone selling for over 200,000 naira in the stores. This was a deal he couldn't pass up. "Where is the guy?" John asked, already making up his mind to buy the phone. "I'll meet you at the market at 5 p.m., David said. "He'll be there with the phone." John hung up the phone and went back to work, his mind racing with excitement. He couldn't wait to get his hands on that phone. At 5 p.m. John met David at the market. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the crowded stalls. David led John to a small stall tucked away in a corner. A young man with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap was sitting behind the stall, the iPhone box in front of him. "John, this is the guy," David said, nodding at the young man. "He's selling the phone for 20,000 naira. John's eyes locked onto the phone box. He could hardly believe his luck. He pulled out his wallet and handed over the cash. The young man handed him the phone box and John ripped it open, revealing the shiny new iPhone inside. "Thanks, man," John said, grinning at David. "This is the best deal I've ever made." David smiled back. "I told you it was a steal." John walked home, the iPhone clutched tightly in his hand. He couldn't wait to show it off to his friends and family. Little did he know this phone would change his life forever. John spent the rest of the evening exploring his new iPhone. He downloaded apps, took selfies and even video called his sister in Abuja. The phone's sleek design and user-friendly interface made him feel like $1,000,000. As he was browsing through the phone settings, he stumbled upon a folder labeled Confidential. His curiosity piqued. John opened the folder and found a series of encrypted files. He tried to open one, but it required a password. John shrugged and closed the folder, thinking it was just some leftover data from the phone's previous owner. But as he continued to explore the phone, he couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something more to these encrypted files. The next day, John decided to take the phone to a tech expert in Computer Village. The expert, a bespectacled man named Mr. Thompson, took one look at the phone and raised an eyebrow. "Where did you get this phone?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice laced with curiosity. John explained how he had bought it from a guy at the market. Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully and began to work on the encrypted files. After a few minutes of typing away on his computer, Mr. Thompson looked up at John with a serious expression. "John, this phone belonged to a very important person. These encrypted files contain sensitive information about a 1 billion naira embezzlement scandal." John's eyes widened in shock. "What? How is that possible?" Mr. Thompson leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "The previous owner of this phone was a politician who was involved in the scandal. He must have used this phone to store evidence of the scandal, but it looks like he never got a chance to use it." John's mind was racing. He had stumbled upon something huge. He could expose the scandal and bring the perpetrators to justice. But as he looked at the phone, he felt a pang of greed. He could use this information to his advantage to become rich and powerful. "Mr. Thompson, can you help me access the funds in these offshore accounts?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson looked at him with a mixture of surprise and concern. "John, I don't think that's a good idea. This is a serious crime we're talking about. You could get in serious trouble." But John's mind was made up. He was tired of living in poverty and this was his chance to change his life. He convinced Mr. Thompson to help him and together they accessed the offshore accounts. The money poured in and John's life was transformed overnight. He bought a mansion in Lekki, luxury cars and designer suits. He became a celebrity in Lagos, with people clamoring to be his friend. But as John basked in his newfound wealth and fame, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was living a lie. He had built his life on stolen money, and he knew that it wouldn't last forever. John's new life was a whirlwind of parties, luxury cars, and designer clothes. He became a regular at high-end nightclubs, where he would spend thousands of dollars on champagne and caviar. People fawned over him, eager to be his friend. But as time went on, John began to feel a growing sense of paranoia. He couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to slip up so they could take him down. He started to vary his routine, taking different routes to work and changing his phone number frequently. One night, John received a mysterious text message. "You didn't earn that money," it read. John's heart skipped a beat as he wondered who could have sent it. He tried to brush it off as a prank, but the message lingered in his mind. Despite his growing unease, John continued to live life to the fullest. He bought a yacht and threw lavish parties, determined to enjoy his wealth while it lasted. But the feeling of being watched never went away, and John found himself looking over his shoulder more and more often. As the months went by, John's relationships began to suffer. His friends and family grew tired of his constant paranoia and his refusal to share his wealth with them. John's sister, who had once been so proud of him, now barely spoke to him. "You're not the same person anymore," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "You're letting this money consume you." John knew she was right, but he couldn't help himself. He was addicted to the rush of adrenaline that came with living life on the edge. And besides, he had come too far to turn back now. But little did John know, his world was about to come crashing down around him. The authorities had finally tracked down the iPhone and they were closing in on him. John's mansion was buzzing with activity as he prepared for his birthday party. Caterers scurried about, setting up tables and chairs, while the DJ spun a lively mix of Afrobeats and hip-hop. Just as the party was getting underway, John's phone rang. He answered, expecting it to be one of his friends or family members wishing him a happy birthday. But instead it was the police. "John, we need to talk to you about the iPhone," the officer said, his voice firm but polite. John's heart sank. He had been expecting this moment for months, but he had hoped to avoid it. "What about it?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "We have evidence that you used the phone to access offshore accounts and embezzle funds," the officer replied. "We need you to come down to the station and answer some questions." John knew he was in trouble. He tried to stall, telling the officer that he was in the middle of a party and couldn't leave. But the officer was insistent. "John, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," he said. "Either you come down to the station willingly or we'll come and get you." John knew he had no choice. He hung up the phone and made his way to the door, where he was met by a team of police officers. They handcuffed him and led him away as his party guests looked on in shock. As John sat in the police station, he couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. He had trusted Mr. Thompson, the tech expert, to help him access the offshore accounts. But now he realized that Mr. Thompson must have been working with the police all along. John's anger turned to despair as he realized the extent of his betrayal. He had lost everything: his freedom, his wealth, and his reputation. And it was all because of his greed and naivety. As he sat in his cell waiting for his trial, John couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would he spend the rest of his life in prison, or would he find a way to redeem himself? John's trial was a media sensation, with reporters and cameras packing the courtroom. The prosecution presented its case, revealing the extent of John's involvement in the embezzlement scandal. They showed how he had used the iPhone to access offshore accounts and steal millions of naira. The defense team argued that John was an unwitting pawn in a larger scheme, but the judge was unsympathetic. "You knew exactly what you were doing," he said, his voice stern. "You used the iPhone to access offshore accounts and steal millions of naira." The verdict was guilty and the sentence was life in prison. John felt his world crumbling around him as he was led away in handcuffs. He thought about his family, his friends, and his business. He had lost everything. As he sat in his cell, John couldn't help but think about how far he had fallen. He had gone from being a struggling mechanic to a millionaire, and now he was a convicted felon. He thought about the choices he had made, the mistakes he had committed, and the opportunities he had missed. John's mind was filled with regret and remorse. He thought about the people he had hurt, the relationships he had damaged, and the trust he had broken. He knew he had let everyone down, including himself. The days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months. John's once luxurious lifestyle was now a distant memory, replaced by the harsh realities of prison life. He had to share a small cell with 2 other inmates and he had to eat the same bland food every day. John's health began to decline and he felt like he was losing himself. He had lost his freedom, his wealth, and his reputation. He had lost everything that had defined him. One day, as John was walking in the prison yard, he saw a familiar face. It was Mr. Thompson, the tech expert who had helped him access the offshore accounts. John's anger boiled over and he confronted Mr. Thompson. "You betrayed me," John spat. "You set me up." Mr. Thompson looked at him with a mixture of sadness and regret. "I'm sorry, John," he said. "I was in a difficult situation and I made a mistake." John shook his head, feeling a sense of despair wash over him. He realized that he had been blinded by his greed and ambition and that he had paid the ultimate price. As John walked back to his cell, he knew that he would never be the same again. He had lost everything and he had no one to blame but himself. He thought about the choices he had made, the mistakes he had committed, and the opportunities he had missed. John's story was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of greed and ambition. It was a story that would haunt him for the rest of his life, a reminder of what could have been if only he had made different choices. As John lay in his bed, he couldn't help but think about the future. He knew he would spend the rest of his life in prison, but he also knew that he had the power to change. He could use his experiences to help others, to warn them about the dangers of greed and ambition. John's story was not just a story of downfall, but also a story of redemption. It was a reminder that no matter how far we fall, we always have the power to rise again.